Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one we are going to head down to England once again, and we're going to return to a brewery that has now featured on the channel a couple of times before. This will be review number 4 that I'm doing from these guys, and the last review that I did from them, number 3, that was actually my first beer that I had from them in about 7 years. I reviewed 2 beers from these guys just after I started the channel back in 2013, and then for some reason I just couldn't get a hold of any of their beers until very recently. But I've always been impressed with the quality of the beer that these guys have done. The last beer I tried I was very impressed with, and the one that we're going to try today is a style that I've never had from them before. This brewery are getting a lot of hype at the moment, and based on the last beer that I had, that is pretty well justified, I have to say. So that makes me even more curious to try this one, and as always I hope that you guys enjoy my take on this beer. So for this one then, we are going to head down to London, the English capital. We're going to go to Tottenham Hale in the north of the city to be specific, and we're going to have a look at another beer from Pressure Drop Brewing. So this particular beer is called It's My Party and I'll Cry If I Want To. This one is a 10% Imperial pastry stout. They're describing it as a maple coconut and chocolate Imperial granola stout. So yeah, really curious to see how it turns out. They're saying that the adjuncts in this beer are cocoa nibs, maple syrup, toasted coconut, lactose and then salt. So yeah, I think this one should be a pretty damn interesting beer, I have to say. So the last beer that I had from these guys was the Alligator Tugboat, which was a Simcoe New England IPA. I was really impressed with that one, and prior to that I had the Stokey Brown, which was a brown ale of course, and then the Freimanns Dunkelweisse back in 2013, and those were very nice beers. That was when this brewery was still bottling their stuff, of course. I think I bought that beer, or both of those beers, in odd bins in Aberdeen actually, but that was the first encounter I had with this brewery, and then for some reason I never saw anything from these guys for about 7.5 years. Just craziness. So definitely nice to be able to review a few more beers from these guys here on the channel. I'm very curious to see how this one turns out, and as I said earlier, I hope that you guys enjoy my take on this one. 10% Imperial pastry stout, which is always a very nice style. So yeah, let's see how we get on with this one then. So as always with my reviews, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from Pressure Drop Brewing before, and we will no doubt return to these guys in the fairly near future. I do have an IPA to review from these guys again that hopefully you guys will enjoy, but there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The whole channel of course has a geography based tagging system, so you can go into the homepage and search for beer based on country, city, state, county, province, prefecture, whatever it is you happen to be interested in. Do check out the playlists of beers from different countries. There is one there for all the English beers that I've reviewed for you. That's being added to quite regularly at the moment because I am at home in the motherland of Scotland for a little bit, and that means I've got easy access to the English beers. We've also got a fairly steady stream of English stuff over in Sweden these days, which is always great. The English beer scene is thriving at the moment, but as always, please do get in touch and let me know some of the other beers and breweries that you guys would like to see me review. It's always great to hear from you guys that are watching the videos, and the support that you show the channel is hugely appreciated. So anyway, on to my brewery notes then, to tell you a little bit about Pressure Drop Brewery then. So Pressure Drop Brewery was founded back in 2012 by Ben Freeman, Graham O'Brien and Sam Smith. So apparently Graham and Sam have known each other since their school days, and they met Ben during his time working at London Fields Brewery. But apparently they homebrewed together on a 50-litre brew kit in Graham's shed during the Olympic summer of 2012 before they moved into a railway arch in Bohemia Place in Hackney, which I believe is East London if I'm remembering rightly. But later in that year, yeah, late 2012, they moved into this railway arch. But at this stage they were brewing on a 5-barrel kit, and they gradually just built this up over the next few years. But having encountered various issues with their equipment, they decided that it was time to move on, and they started scouting out new locations in 2015. But they eventually settled on a site in Tottenham Hale, and on this place they have a 10-year lease, and they began brewing there in 2017, and they've gradually again been scaling up the fermentation capacity of this place. These days they operate a 20-barrel brew kit, and they've gradually just been, you know, building up the infrastructure. They're getting their beers spread out a little bit more, or distributed a little bit more kind of widely, if you like, and you know, building up the team at the brewery, and as I said, building up the infrastructure of the brewery as well. But these days they've got an on-site tap room which you can go and visit, and as of January 2021, when I'm filming this review for you, they've produced around 120 different kinds of beer. So yeah, they're getting a lot of hype at the moment for their New England hazy IPAs. As I said earlier, the Alligator Tugboat that I tried, I was very impressed with, and I do have what, if I remember rightly, is a double IPA to review from them as well, and I've heard that that one is pretty good as well. But yeah, that's all I can really tell you about Pressure Drop Brewing for the moment. If you want to learn more about these guys, you can check out the brewery website, you can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn more about all those different beers that they've done. But yeah, 120 beers over the course of, you know, about 8 years or so. That's a fairly decent return, but I think in recent times they have been considerably more prolific than they have been previously. So yeah, let's get on and actually have a taste of this beer then. So I'll just let you have a little look at the artwork of this one before we open it up. There you can see the kittens just kind of chilling with a little bit of birthday cake, or what I'm assuming is birthday cake. There you can see at the top, that is the Pressure Drop Brewing Company symbol. It tells you a little bit on the back of the beer here. So it says, rich, luscious, fudgy, nutty and outright delicious. This Imperial Stout has got a great blend of sweet and salty with a touch of class from bitter and cacao. It's a real party. Oh yeah, okay, it tells tasting notes, but we're going to ignore that of course. But like I said earlier, the additions in this one are cacao nibs, maple syrup, toasted coconut, lactose and salt, and it's a 10% maple coconut and chocolate Imperial granola stout. So I think this one should be pretty cool. There you can see on the back, it is just pretty much blank. It's the cats on the front that they obviously want us to focus on. But it says here that this one was packaged on the 15th of December 2020, and it's best before the 15th of the 6th 21. So that's kind of strange actually. I wonder why they're only recommending 6 months to drink this thing, because you know, normally you should be able to age a 10% Imperial Stout for a couple of years. So yeah, I wonder why that is actually. Is it maybe something to do with the lactose? Could it be to do with that? I'm really not sure. But I mean, I wouldn't have thought that. I don't think lactose, if I remember rightly from my chemistry, lactose doesn't really break down as long as you keep it in the dark and keep the temperature constant. It shouldn't really break down. But yeah, regardless, nice can this one, 440ml. I think I paid maybe about £7 or so for this can, something like that. So to translate that for you, that would be about €8, maybe €8.50. You know, 85 Swedish kronor in that case, and then for Americans, yeah, maybe about $9, something like that. $9 American for the can, maybe a little bit more, $10 perhaps. But yeah, 10% Imperial Stout this one. Let's get it out and we'll get on with the taste. And I have to just say, very curious to see what this beer has in store for us. Absolutely. I got some very, very nice Imperial Stouts actually in my last order from the House of Trembling Madness. As I said earlier, do make sure that you check out that that web shop. They've got some awesome stuff in there. So yeah, there we go. So this looks pretty damn impressive, I have to say. But yeah, as you can see, and as you would expect from an Imperial Stout, this beer has poured a lovely dark ebony rosewood colour. It had maybe about an eighth or something like that of a frothy, I would say kind of medium tan head. That's faded away to just be a very, very thin foamy layer. It does have a nice little bit of a foamy ring around the edge of the glass there. One or two big bubbles sticking towards the side of the glass, but a few little ones just going up towards the bottom of that head there. But if I shine the light through this beer, it is pretty much black as night, a lovely kind of dark ebony rosewood colour. Yeah, but yeah, it does have a little bit of a kind of Pepsi Max, kind of Coca-Cola coloured edge to it, to be honest with you. But yeah, otherwise it's pretty damn, it is pretty damn thick, this one, I have to say. So yeah, it looks really impressive, to be honest with you. So yeah, nothing overly surprising about this beer when you consider what style it is. It looks great, it looks absolutely great. So let's have a closer look at the aroma then and just see how we get on with this one. I have to say, very curious. Ooh, that does smell very nice. Definitely smells very nice. To be honest with you, on first impression, if I smelt this beer, I would wonder if it has a little bit of coffee in it. You have to take it in very deeply and be very kind of pernickety with it to pick up the fact that it doesn't. But if I just smelled this beer on a whim, you know, just very, very quickly had a glancing smell at it, I would think this was probably a coffee stout, to be honest with you. And the other thing is, it certainly covers its alcohol really well. It's quite difficult to tell, I think, in the aroma that this one is an Imperial stout. But yeah, the aroma out of this beer, while it isn't quite what I expected, you know, when you hear pastry stout, you think a very, very kind of sweet stout, you know, like these Amundsen things. But I guess in Scandinavia, we are quite spoiled when it comes to the Imperial stouts. I've never come across an Imperial stout as thick as some of the ones that you'll come across in Scandinavia. So that's quite often why when I try the American stuff, I'm always like, yeah, it's not as thick as the stuff that I drink normally. That's why you always get that. I don't think anywhere does stouts quite on the same thickness as the Scandinavians do. But yeah, it's a lovely smelling beer. That. Let's just try and break down this aroma for you a little bit and describe it. As I say, aroma is always half the experience when it comes to craft beer. But yeah, it's interesting, this one. So straight away with this beer, you're going to notice that it has a really kind of silky backbone to it. That's the lactose that's giving you that. And I would suspect, does this beer have a bit of oat in it? I wouldn't be surprised if this one had a little bit of oat or oatmeal or something like that as well. But yeah, it's got a lovely kind of just silky backbone from the lactose, absolutely. Yeah, it's got a lovely kind of silky backbone to it in there. You can smell there's some nice kind of graininess in there. It does smell kind of cereal-like, so I can see why they would say, you know, like granola in this one. It does have a little bit of a kind of roasty, toasty black malt as well. There's a good little bit of a kind of chocolatey, you know, like a hot chocolate type powder to the beer. So I mean, the coconut you get in there as well. I mean, this beer is really interesting. It's actually quite hard just to break it down and properly describe that aroma there. But I would say the backbone of this beer is a really kind of thick, smooth, sort of oaty, lactosey sort of thing. I'd be very, very surprised if this beer doesn't actually have oats or maybe even oatmeal in it, come to think of it, because it's got a lovely, just smooth and thick backbone to it. You can smell in that beer, it's got a little bit, it has a little bit of a kind of, it definitely has a little bit of a kind of cocoa edge to it, if that makes sense. Like the chocolate that you get out of this beer, it's maybe about a 60-70% cocoa. It's got a, you know, it has a kind of, it's almost like a kind of cocoa powder sort of thing, like, you know, the Nesquik stuff that you get, that Nesquik powder that you make chocolate milk with. It almost reminds me of that a little bit, but just darker in its cocoa content. So, you know, 60-70% cocoa chocolate in this one, but again, quite powdery. But as I said, this beer, it does have a little bit of a kind of sort of grainy, it's almost like rye-like, to be honest, like a well-fired bread crust with a little bit of rye bread or something like that. It's got a little bit of that going on with it, so I can see where they get the granola from in this one. But the more that you smell of this beer, the more you get the coconut out of it. When your nose adjusts to this beer, there's definitely some kind of coconut there. You do get a little bit of brown sugar out of the beer, but I think the brown sugar really takes a back seat, and it is quite, you know, like caramel wafery. So again, I can see it's, you know, I would associate that with the maple syrup, to be honest with you. So yeah, it's really interesting. It does have a little bit of that kind of caramelly, wafery sort of thing, but I don't get a big, rich, treacly molasses kind of thing out of this beer. You know, those really, really heavy, rich brown sugars. So I'd be curious to see if that kind of transpires when we actually have a taste of the beer. But yeah, I mean, from the appearance of this one, it has got a good level of haze to it, but as I say, it's not this kind of soup, you know, soupy and gloopy is maybe not the right thing to say about the beer in this case, but it's definitely got that big kind of dark, oily kind of thing going on in it. Remember, to get the colours in these beers, of course, one, it's down to the type of malts that you use, but two, it's also down to the length of the boil. The longer you boil the beer, the more the sugars caramelise, and thus the darker colour of the beer you're going to get. With a big Imperial stout like this, you're talking like a 5 or 6 hour boil. So yeah, it's really interesting how everything kind of goes together in this beer for me. I really like how everything just pieces together, for sure. But yeah, lovely Lovely smelling beer in that sense, and I think we've talked about the maltiness quite a lot. There's one or two little nutty elements to the beer. There's also one or two little kind of woody characteristics as well, and you do have a little bit of a kind of brown bready backbone. It's the more that you smell of this beer, the more the kind of granola type aroma takes across. But I wouldn't be surprised if there's a bit of oatmeal in here. But yeah, roasty, toasty, kind of bread crusty backbone, a bit of that kind of chocolatey powder in there towards the back of the nose definitely, and then the oaty smoothness underneath, and then all the other stuff that I've described too. So yeah, on the hoppy side of things then, that's what we should also talk about. Pardon me. Not too much to report on the hoppy side of things. I mean, there's a little bit of earthiness to the beer. You do get a tiny little bit of floral character as well, and a little bit of light grassiness, but not much in the way of a kind of green component to the beer. Perhaps this is going to be one of these beers that just has a little bit of Cascade or Magnum or something in it. You know, maybe even, you know, a push in England it might be Bramling's Cross, because they can add some really nice fruity characteristics. But yeah, the green component of the beer, little tiny touch earthy, little bit of floral aromaticity, and a little bit of a lighter kind of grassiness as well. But yeah, the fruity side of things is kind of as you would expect. I mean, it's got a little bit, it has a wee tiny little bit of a kind of raisiny note to it. There's a wee bit of a kind of more juicy fig and a little bit of a black currant. I don't get too much of the more oily blackberry out of this one. The fruits for me are not kind of overly prominent. Yeah, it's mainly got just a little bit of, there's a little bit of a kind of raisiny sharpness, bit of a juicy fig, and then a more kind of juicy black currant as well. But yeah, the aroma profile of this beer is very, very nice, and it does pave the way, I think, for an interesting flavour profile. So take a bit of time to enjoy the aroma, as I always say, but we're going to have a taste of this one now and see how we go. So this one is It's My Party and I'll Cry If I Want To, a 10% Imperial pastry stout, maple, coconut and chocolate Imperial granola stout, as Pressure Dropper describing it. But let's have a taste of this one then and just see how we get on. Really very, very curious about this beer. Slàinte, skål, cheers. Oh yeah, I'm going to tell you straight away, this beer on the impact is a hell of a lot sweeter than the aroma gives the impression of. But it really, you can feel this beer already kind of drying out and just becoming gradually more complex. But I'm just going to say straight away, really good stuff. Well done to Pressure Drop Brewing for this. Solid Imperial stout in my mind. Lovely stuff. Yeah, this beer for me, when you have the liquid on your tongue, if that makes sense, it's a lot more kind of straight shooting in that sense, but it's in the aftertaste. You get the aftertaste is where a lot of the kind of complexity of this beer really starts to show its head, and that's interesting, absolutely. So yeah, when you take the liquid in on this one, I mean, it's the kind of lactose that comes out. You get a little bit of the coconut in there. It almost gives you the impression of like vanilla as well. So yeah, it's a very silky kind of oaty type stout, this beer, and you know, when you first take it in, but then the aftertaste really shows you all the different complexities that this beer has. So yeah, big silky oaty, lactosey type thing when you take it in, good bit of chocolate in there, but then it really just, the way that this beer kind of dries out and leaves all these complexities in the middle of your palate, I think that is pretty special actually. So yeah, lovely. Yeah, it's a lovely beer, that, and I'm not surprised that these guys can do a very good Imperial Stout. I always like trying something from the light end of the spectrum and something from the dark end of a spectrum, because I think that shows you really what a brewery is all about. And I've been impressed with the New England IPA that I've had, and now this Imperial Stout, and I've got another IPA to review from these guys. Next step must be to try like some sort of lager, I think, from them, and potentially you know, potentially a West Coast IPA if that's possible. That would be the next thing too. But yeah, thumbs up to them for this beer. Let's try and break down the flavour of this one then. So I mean, the backbone of this beer, you can feel there is a little bit of a kind of, I've got a feeling there's a bit of carafa in this. I mean, in the middle third of your palate, you can feel a little bit of a roasty, toasty, kind of bread crusty quality. That blankets the middle of your tongue, and as you go into that back third of your palate, you can feel the same thing, but it's just a little bit smoother, if that makes sense. You know, they say granola in this one. That really, really does reflect what's going on in this beer. It is like a sort of, it's like a brown bread, but then a little bit more kind of almost crunchy. It's that kind of flavour you get. It's like a little bit more of a kind of, like an energy bar type flavour you get out of this beer. It's almost like that, to be honest with you. So yeah, in the middle third of your palate, you can feel that roasty, toasty, kind of bread crusty quality there. That's forming the base of the beer, but then on top of that, you start to get that more kind of almost kind of cereal energy bar sort of thing sitting on top of it, and that's interesting. If you go to that border region between middle third and back third of your palate, there is a really kind of roasty, toasty. There is a really nice kind of roasty, toasty bitterness to the beer in there. It is a little bit more kind of black malty there, but then as you go on to that back third of your palate, again you've got a kind of bread crusty note sort of sitting underneath. You've got a little bit of that kind of cereal bar sort of thing again, but it just feels thicker. It really just does feel thicker. But in both the middle third and the back third of your palate, on top of that, you can feel that layer of lactose. You can really feel just that layer of lactose kind of sitting in there. So it's really interesting that it feels that it's the same flavour layers almost, but in the back third of your palate it just feels a little bit thicker, which is quite interesting. Then it's separated. The thickness, as you move forward from that very back part of your palate, it's quite smooth but still obviously grainy, but then the thickness just drops away as you reach that kind of border region, and then as you move forward you can feel, you can feel it just kind of building up a little bit, which is again quite interesting, I have to say. So I really like that about how this beer just kind of pieces itself together. That's only the very, very base of the beer. The other thing you're going to notice, if you go to the kind of front corners of your palate, then diagonally back, you will notice a few sort of woody undertones that make their way out of the beer. And if you go to the very centre of your palate and then just move forward, there's a little bit of a nutty kind of thing going on as well. So yeah, the whole vibe to this beer is pretty interesting. It's that the base of this beer I think is really nice, but these flavours that I'm describing for you, they take a little bit of time to come out in the aftertaste. The beer, when you take the liquid in, is really very slick and very sweet in a lot of ways. It's the chocolate that comes out of it. I think the other thing to note with this beer is that if you go to the kind of front half of that middle third of your tongue, you're going to get a little bit more of the coconut. I think the coconut flavour really just kind of comes out in that sweeter part of the front of the middle third of your palate, sorry. So yeah, you get that kind of roasty, toasty coconut sweetness just coming out underneath, which is great. Yeah, so I really like that about this one for sure. I mean, the coconut flavours start to come out more and more with this one. The other thing to talk about in this beer is the chocolate. The chocolate's really interesting for me as well, because you do get, if you go to that back third of your palate, you do get a bit of sweetness in the very centre of the back third of your palate, but then as you move further forward, you get that bitter area on the border region, but then in the centre of your palate, in the very, very dead centre of your palate, you get a nice, you do get quite a thick kind of chocolatey note in there as well. And in terms of the cocoa content, this will be the cocoa nibs, of course. There is a bit of dryness to it in fairness, but in terms of the cocoa content, I would say that this one, it's not madly high. It's somewhere between a 60 and 70% cocoa chocolate that you get with this, but it does have that sort of chocolate powder, that Nesquik kind of chocolate powder type vibe to it. It's got a little bit of that, but in the very centre of your palate, I think there is quite a toasty, brown, sugary note to this one. The thing that's interesting is as you go, kind of gradually move out from that centre of your palate, it's like you've got underneath, you've got the chocolate, and then on the very kind of top of the hill almost, because this is a very layered beer, this for me, on top of that you've got the the kind of boozy, caramelly aspect, but as you move further out on top of that, that's when you start to get the maple syrup, or that caramelly wafer sort of thing, as I would kind of call it, to be honest. So that is a really interesting kind of point about this beer. It really is very layered. So yeah, middle third of your palate, you've got that kind of bread crusty sort of thing, you've got a little bit of the kind of cereal bar thing, then you have the lactose, then you've got this kind of this sort of layer of chocolate for me, then you've got a kind of very rich caramel on top, and then the maple syrup is just kind of coating all those other things that I talked about. And then further forward you just get a little bit almost in the granola layer, if you like, you get the kind of coconutty qualities coming out of this beer. So it's very interesting, and the saltiness of the beer, you do get a little bit of that kind of almost on the, it pushes in towards like the front third of your palate, you do get just a little bit of saltiness out of this beer. So from that perspective it's very interesting. The malty side of this beer is just so layered, and then you've got woody and nutty complexities coming out of the beer as well. I mean, there's a lot going on in this one, but it's a beautifully executed beer. It's definitely a sipper. I mean, I'm going to share this with my dad after I finish the video, but this is a lovely kind of sipping beer, this one. It's very, very nice. So yeah, I think we've covered the malty side of the beer as much as we need to. The hoppy side of the beer, though, is kind of what you'd expect. In the back third of in the back corners of your palate, there's a good little bit of a kind of toasty earthiness there, which I quite like. That kind of spreads forward a little bit. You do get a wee tiny little bit of herbal quality there, but as you reach the very front corners of the palate, there's a sort of remnant of a little bit of floral character in this one. There's something tells me it could be an English hop that's in this. Maybe, you know, Branlin's Cross or a little bit of Kent Golding. I don't think it's strong enough in the kind of earthiness and stuff to be like Fugel or something. So I wouldn't be surprised if this is an English hop beer. Of course, you've got things like Summit and so on from the States that could give you a little bit of that. But there's just something about the way that the floral and kind of herbal and earthy sort of side to this beer comes out that makes me wonder if it's English. But then around the very front curve of the palate, it's a little bit lighter and grassy. The grassiness doesn't really have a zest to it. Again, it's quite smooth, and it's that smoothness to the green component and the herbal quality that makes me think English hops. So yeah, the green component to this beer is kind of what you would expect. But yeah, on that front third of your palate, you've got that nice oily bubble where those juicy fruity esters just roll their way out of the beer. If you go just behind that to the kind of border region between middle third and front third of your palate, you've got a little bit of a kind of cakey, brownie type vibe there. It has a really, it's like a kind of chocolate cakey sort of thing, but like a slightly well-fired chocolate cake. There's a little bit of that there, but then you can feel a wee bit of the cakey kind of vibe just underpinning the fruity part on the front third of your palate. You can just feel a little bit of that cakey brownie sort of thing in there, which is quite interesting. But yeah, on that front third of your palate, if you go to the back of it, you will get a little bit of a kind of raisiny sharpness there when you take the beer in. Like I said, this beer is a bit sweeter in the beginning for sure. So yeah, you've got a little bit of a raisiny note in there. As you move further forward, it does get a little bit more kind of plummy. There's definitely a kind of raisiny sharpness, but still a plummy kind of oiliness to it, and it's got that kind of Christmas puddingy type vibe on the front of your palate. But yeah, as you move further forward, it's definitely got a kind of nice, quite rich, figgy kind of quality to it. There's a few kind of sultana-like notes in there, dates maybe, but then as you reach the kind of front part of that front third of your tongue, you'll get a more, there is a little bit of a black curranty type quality in there, like sultanas, black currants, and then a little bit more of an oily kind of blackberry for me, which I really, really like. So yeah, the fruity side of this beer is quite interesting, and it suits everything else that's going on in this beer. So for me, this is quite a cakey Imperial Stout overall, but I mean, it's quite difficult to describe the flavour profile on this one because it is quite unique in that sense. That granola type thing that they're making in there, it really reminds me of, like, you know, cereal bars, you know, these cereal nutrient bar things that you can get. It really reminds me of that. But it's a lovely beer, and that's the main thing to take away from this. This is a very, very nicely executed beer in my opinion. So thumbs up to Pressure Drop Brewing for this. This is a really, really solid beer, this one. But yeah, I think we've covered the flavour profile enough. Let's talk about the mouthfeel quickly. Definitely a full-bodied beer, there's no doubt in my mind about that. The carbonation is very, very smooth in this one. The mouthfeel overall It's a blend between oily and being, you know, like very, very creamy. It's definitely got that sort of vibe to it. So yeah, quite an oily but quite creamy beer in my opinion. So yeah, big oily, very kind of creamy thing. This has had a very long boil, this, like 5-6 hours, as I was saying earlier. So yeah, very, very long boil this beer, very oily, very smooth, clean. Carbonation is not a lot in this beer. But yeah, the malty base, it has a little bit of a roasty toasty side to it, a little bit of a grainy side, but overall it's quite smooth and quite slick almost, like I said. In terms of bitterness, I think this beer, I don't find this too bitter at all, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's like 50 IBUs. There is a little bit of earthiness in the back of the palate too, and also some roasty toasty elements to the malt base, so maybe 50 IBUs is a good bet, or maybe 40, something like that. But yeah, it's not a madly bitter beer, this one. Maybe even 40 IBUs is a bit generous. But yeah, you do have a little bit of bitterness in that middle part of your palate for sure. But yeah, the malty side of the beer, it's got a good balance between being roasty toasty, a little bit more kind of grainy, lovely smoothness to it, and then a bit of sweetness. It's all about the aftertaste. For me, this beer, there's a little bit of hoppy character to it, then you've got a nice kind of more oily, pardon me, fruity quality to this one as well. But the message to take away is that this is a lovely, lovely beer, and I'm certainly impressed with my first Imperial Stout from Pressure Drop Brewing, so I won't hesitate to try more if I do get the chance for that. But yeah, I like this one. The granola side of it, that granola descriptor really does fit this beer. For me, it's very much like a kind of cereal protein bar type thing. So yeah, I think on that note, that's a good place to kind of round off this review. So yeah, let's leave it at that then. So this one was the It's My Party and I'll Cry If I Want To, a maple, coconut and chocolate Imperial granola stout, 10% ABV, basically an Imperial pastry stout from Pressure Drop Brewing in Tottenham Hale in the north of London. Very impressed with this one. I've been impressed with the 2 beers that I've tried from these guys when I'm home, and there is another IPA review to come up for you as well. So yeah, let's leave it there. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Pressure Drop Brewing. Thank you once again for watching. Check out all my social media, check out Pressure Drop Brewing, and do give me some recommendations of other London breweries, because I do hope to get there at some point and visit their tap room, do an out and about video with my friend Craig from Kent Beer Reviews, and also Jake from Jake O Beer, if he can make it down, that would be awesome. But yeah, Pressure Drop Brewing getting a lot of hype at the moment, and based on the beers I've had from them recently, thoroughly deserved, so thumbs up to them. Thank you again for watching. Check out my social media, like I said, check out Pressure Drop Brewing if you get the chance, and I will catch you guys on the next review. The It's My Party and I'll Cry If I Want To, 10% Imperial pastry stout, or as I say, maple, coconut and chocolate Imperial granola stout from Pressure Drop Brewing in Tottenham Hale, North London, down in England. Thanks again for watching, and I will catch you guys very soon. Slàinte, skull, cheers, and I can feel the booze going to my head with this one. Lovely.